Who was Eber, and why does his name echo through the corridors of biblical history? In the long line of patriarchs whose lives shaped the spiritual, cultural, and historical identity of the ancient world, Eber stands out as a pivotal figure. Mentioned in the genealogies of Genesis, his name is more than just a marker of lineage. It carries profound significance, reaching across centuries to establish the identity of a people who would forever be known as the Hebrews. But who was this man whose name became synonymous with faith, perseverance, and divine calling? To understand Eber is to journey back to the days of Shem, his great-grandfather, and to uncover the threads of a legacy that connected the world before and after the flood, a world filled with change, division, and the eternal pursuit of God's promises. Eber was born into the lineage of Shem, one of Noah's 3 sons, who had survived the great flood and was blessed by Noah as the spiritual leader of his family. Shem's descendants were tasked with carrying forward the covenantal promises made to Noah, preserving the worship of the one true God in a world that was rapidly turning toward rebellion and idolatry. By the time Eber entered the scene, humanity was once again divided, fractured by pride and scattered by God's intervention at the Tower of Babel. Eber was born into a family that held tightly to its spiritual heritage, standing firm amidst the growing tides of cultural and spiritual compromise. His life would become a testament to the enduring power of faith and the unbroken thread of God's plan for redemption. The genealogies of Genesis trace Eber's lineage with precision, connecting him directly to Arphaxad, the son of Shem. This connection is significant, as it situates Eber within a line of spiritual leaders who had a direct understanding of God's covenantal promises. Eber's father, Salah, would have inherited the teachings and traditions passed down from Shem and Noah, ensuring that the knowledge of God's faithfulness, judgment, and mercy was preserved. Into this legacy Eber was born, a child of promise in a time of uncertainty. His very existence was a reminder that God's plan was still unfolding, even in the face of human rebellion and the scattering of nations. The name Eber itself holds profound significance. Derived from a root meaning to cross or to pass over, it is believed to symbolize transition and movement, a fitting representation of a man whose life bridged pivotal moments in biblical history. More importantly, Eber's name became the root of the term Hebrew, a designation that would define the identity of Abraham and his descendants. The Hebrews would come to be known as a people set apart, chosen by God to carry forward his covenant and to bear witness to his faithfulness among the nations. Eber's name, therefore, is not just a personal identifier, but a symbol of faith, perseverance, and the fulfillment of God's promises. The connection between Eber's name and the term Hebrew underscores his unique role in the biblical narrative. While the genealogies often move quickly from one generation to the next, Eber is given particular attention, standing as a patriarch whose influence shaped the identity of his descendants in profound ways. His life marked a turning point in the story of humanity, a time when the covenantal promises given to Shem began to take on a clearer focus through the lineage that would lead to Abraham. In this sense, Eber serves as a bridge, a man whose life connected the past to the future, ensuring that the legacy of faith was preserved and passed down through the generations. Eber's birth occurred in a time of significant cultural and spiritual upheaval. Following the flood, humanity had been given a second chance, but pride and rebellion soon took hold. The construction of the Tower of Babel, a monument to human ambition and defiance against God, resulted in the division of languages and the scattering of nations. It was in this fractured world that Eber's family chose to remain faithful to the God of their fathers, preserving the teachings and traditions that had been entrusted to them. Eber's life would be shaped by this commitment to faith, as he carried forward the legacy of Shem and became a central figure in the story of God's covenant with humanity. To understand Eber's significance, it is essential to recognize the spiritual heritage he inherited. Shem, Eber's great-grandfather, had been blessed by Noah as the bearer of God's promises, tasked with maintaining the worship of the one true God. This blessing, which declared, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem," positioned Shem's lineage as the spiritual leaders of humanity. Eber's birth into this family was not a coincidence, but a continuation of God's plan to preserve a remnant of faithful followers in a world prone to rebellion. His life would reflect the values and principles passed down through his family, ensuring that the covenant remained central to their identity. The legacy of faith that Eber inherited was not without its challenges. The scattering of nations following the events at Babel created a context in which maintaining spiritual unity was increasingly difficult. As languages divided and cultures emerged, the temptation to conform to the practices of surrounding nations grew stronger. Yet, Eber's family chose to remain distinct, holding fast to the worship of the one true God and resisting the pull of idolatry. Eber's birth into this family was a testament to God's faithfulness, a reminder that his promises would endure even in the face of human disobedience. Eber's early years would have been marked by a deep immersion in the teachings and traditions of his family. His father Salah and great-grandfather Shem would have shared with him the stories of creation, the flood, and God's covenant with Noah. These stories were not just history. They were the foundation of Eber's identity, shaping his understanding of God's character and his role in the divine plan. From an early age, Eber would have understood that his life was part of something far greater than himself, a legacy of faith that stretched back to Noah and would continue through his descendants. As we begin this journey into the life of Eber, we see a man whose birth was more than a moment in time. It was a continuation of a divine narrative that would shape the course of history. From his place in the lineage of Shem to the significance of his name, Eber's life is a testament to the enduring power of faith and the unbroken thread of God's promises. His story challenges us to reflect on our own place in God's plan and to consider how our lives can contribute to the legacy of faith that has been passed down through the generations. Eber's early life unfolded against a backdrop of profound transitions in human history as the world adjusted to life after the flood and grappled with the repercussions of the events at Babel. Born into the lineage of Shem, Eber was part of a family that carried an unparalleled spiritual legacy. His grandfather, Arphaxad, and great-grandfather Shem were pillars of faith, entrusted with the responsibility of preserving the knowledge of the one true God in a world increasingly characterized by rebellion and spiritual fragmentation. Eber's youth was shaped by this heritage, a foundation that would influence every aspect of his life and legacy. As a descendant of Shem, Eber was born into a line that had been specifically blessed by Noah. This blessing declared that Shem's lineage would be uniquely aligned with the God of creation, positioning them as spiritual leaders among the nations. Shem, in turn, passed this mantle of responsibility to his descendants, ensuring that the knowledge of God's covenant was preserved and transmitted with care. For Eber, this meant growing up immersed in the teachings and traditions of his family, which emphasized the principles of faith, obedience, and stewardship. From an early age, he would have been taught the stories of creation, the flood, and the covenant God made with Noah, stories that not only shaped his understanding of God, but also his sense of purpose in the world. Eber's grandfather, Arphaxad, played a crucial role in bridging the generations between Shem and Eber, ensuring that the spiritual heritage of the family was not diluted or forgotten. Arphaxad, like Shem, lived in a world that was rapidly diversifying as humanity spread out across the earth. Amidst this diversity, the line of Shem remained distinct, set apart by their unwavering commitment to monotheism. This commitment was no small feat, as the cultural and spiritual environment of the time was one of increasing idolatry and rebellion. The events at Babel had not only scattered humanity, but also deepened the divide between those who remained faithful to God and those who turned to false gods and self-made deities. In this context, Arphaxad's role in preserving the worship of the one true God was critical, and his faithfulness set the stage for Eber's own spiritual journey. Eber's youth would have been marked by a sense of both privilege and responsibility. As part of a family chosen to bear the knowledge of God, he grew up understanding that his life was intertwined with a divine mission. The teachings he received from his father, Salah, and his grandfather Arphaxad were not merely lessons in history, but a living tradition that connected him to the Creator. These teachings emphasize the covenant God made with Noah, a promise that served as both a reminder of God's mercy and a call to live in alignment with His will. For Eber, this meant embracing a life of faith and obedience, even as the world around him drifted further from the truth. The cultural and spiritual environment of Eber's time was one of stark contrasts. On one hand, humanity was experiencing a period of growth and expansion as nations formed and civilizations began to take shape. On the other hand, this expansion was often accompanied by moral decay and spiritual compromise. Idolatry became increasingly prevalent, with people constructing temples to false gods and creating elaborate rituals to honor their own creations. For Eber, this environment presented both a challenge and an opportunity. As a descendant of Shem, he was tasked with preserving the worship of the one true God amidst a sea of competing beliefs. This required a deep commitment to his faith and a willingness to stand apart from the cultural norms of his time. Eber's role in preserving monotheism was not limited to his own personal devotion. It extended to his influence on his family and community. As he grew into adulthood, Eber began to take on the responsibilities of a patriarch, teaching the principles of faith and righteousness to his children and grandchildren. His life became a beacon of faith in a world that was increasingly turning away from God. Through his words and actions, Eber demonstrated that true worship requires not only belief, but also a life lived in obedience to God's commands. This commitment to faithfulness became a defining characteristic of his lineage, ensuring that the worship of the one true God remained central to their identity. The spiritual heritage passed down through Shem and Arphaxad was more than a set of teachings. It was a living relationship with the Creator. This relationship was characterized by reverence, gratitude, and trust in God's promises. For Eber, this meant not only upholding the traditions of his ancestors, but also deepening his own understanding of God's character and will. His life was a continuation of the legacy begun by Shem, a legacy that emphasized the importance of faithfulness in the face of adversity. Eber's story reminds us that faith is not just about preserving the past, it is about living in a way that honors God and inspires others to do the same. Eber's early life also reflects the importance of generational faithfulness in maintaining a covenantal relationship with God. The teachings and traditions he inherited from his family were not the result of chance, but of intentional efforts to pass down the knowledge of God from one generation to the next. This intentionality ensured that the covenant established with Noah remained alive and active, even as the world around them changed. For Eber, this meant taking up the mantle of leadership and becoming a steward of the faith, ensuring that the truths of God's character and promises were not lost amidst the distractions and temptations of the world. In reflecting on Eber's early life and lineage, we see a man who was shaped by the spiritual heritage of his ancestors and the cultural challenges of his time. His youth was a time of preparation as he learned the principles of faith, obedience, and stewardship that would define his life and legacy. Eber's story reminds us that the decisions and actions of one generation have a profound impact on those that follow. His commitment to preserving the worship of the one true God ensured that the covenantal promises given to Shem and Noah were carried forward, setting the stage for the emergence of the Hebrew people and the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan. The events of the Tower of Babel were a defining moment in human history, and they likely left a profound impression on Eber as a man of faith and a descendant of Shem. Babel was a monumental act of human pride and rebellion, a collective effort to construct a tower that would reach the heavens, defying God's command to spread out across the earth. For Eber, who had been raised in a lineage that upheld the worship of the one true God, this act of defiance would have been a stark reminder of humanity's tendency to prioritize ambition and self-interest over obedience to God. The division of languages and the subsequent scattering of nations that followed were both a judgment and a mercy, and Eber's family found themselves at the center of this dramatic shift in the human story. Eber's reaction to the events of Babel would have been shaped by his spiritual heritage and his understanding of God's character. As a descendant of Shem, Eber likely viewed the tower as not only a physical structure, but also a symbol of humanity's collective arrogance and disobedience. The builders of Babel sought to make a name for themselves and to avoid being dispersed, directly opposing God's instructions to Noah's descendants to fill the earth. For Eber, this act of rebellion was deeply troubling, as it reflected the same pride and sinfulness that had led to the flood. Yet, as he watched God intervene to confuse the languages of the people, Eber would have recognized the wisdom and mercy in this judgment. By scattering humanity and thwarting their plans, God not only corrected their disobedience, but also created the conditions for his purposes to unfold in new and unexpected ways. The division of languages at Babel was a moment of profound upheaval, as families and communities were suddenly unable to communicate with one another. For Eber's family, who remained faithful to the God of Shem, this scattering presented both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, the fracturing of humanity made it more difficult to maintain unity and preserve the worship of God. On the other hand, the dispersion created opportunities for Eber and his descendants to carry the knowledge of God into new regions and to establish communities that reflected their faith and values. Eber's role as a patriarch during this time would have been critical in guiding his family through this period of transition and ensuring that their spiritual identity remained intact. The faithfulness of Eber's family amidst widespread rebellion is a testament to their commitment to God's covenant and their understanding of their role in his plan. While many of the scattered nations turned to idolatry and false gods, Eber's lineage remained steadfast in their worship of the one true God. This steadfastness was not accidental. It was the result of generations of intentional teaching and discipleship, beginning with Shem and continuing through Arphaxad, Salah, and Eber himself. As a leader and spiritual guide, Eber would have emphasized the importance of staying true to the principles of faith and obedience, even in the face of cultural and spiritual challenges. Eber's family played a unique role in maintaining faith during this time of upheaval. As other nations drifted further from God, Eber's descendants became a remnant of faithfulness, carrying forward the teachings and traditions that had been entrusted to them. This role required resilience and a willingness to stand apart from the prevailing trends of their time. For Eber, this meant not only preserving the worship of God within his family, but also modeling a life of humility, obedience, and trust in God's provision. His leadership ensured that the truths of God's covenant were not lost amidst the confusion and fragmentation of the post-Babel world. The migration and settlement of Eber's family after Babel were significant events in their history, as they navigated the challenges of establishing new communities in unfamiliar territories. The genealogies in Genesis suggest that Eber's descendants settled in regions that became centers of culture, language, and faith. His son Peleg, whose name means division, was born during the time when the earth was divided, likely a reference to the events of Babel. Peleg's name serves as a marker of this pivotal moment, highlighting the ways in which Eber's family was both affected by and instrumental in the unfolding of God's plan. Eber's descendants, including Peleg, and Joktan, carried forward his legacy, ensuring that the worship of God remained central to their identity and mission. The scattering of nations after Babel also underscores the universality of God's plan and the role of Eber's lineage in its fulfillment. While the division of languages created barriers to communication and unity, it also set the stage for the diversity of cultures and nations that would eventually be reconciled through God's redemptive work. Eber's life and legacy serve as a reminder that even in moments of judgment and division, God's purposes are being accomplished. His family's migration and settlement in new lands reflect their trust in God's guidance and their commitment to carrying out his commands. Eber's faith and leadership during the events of Babel and their aftermath demonstrate the importance of spiritual resilience and adaptability. He understood that the division of humanity was not an end but a beginning, a chance to bring the knowledge of God to new places and to establish communities that reflected his character. For Eber, this meant embracing the challenges of migration and settlement, while remaining rooted in the faith and traditions of his ancestors. His life became a bridge between the world before Babel and the nations that emerged afterward, ensuring that the worship of God continued to thrive even in a fragmented world. The story of Eber and the Tower of Babel challenges us to consider our own response to moments of disruption and change. Just as Eber's family faced the scattering of nations and the fragmentation of language, we too encounter challenges that test our faith and our commitment to God's purposes. Eber's example reminds us that faithfulness in the face of adversity requires trust in God's sovereignty and a willingness to adapt without compromising our core beliefs. His life serves as a testament to the enduring power of faith to overcome division and to bring about unity through a shared commitment to God's plan. In reflecting on Eber's likely reaction to Babel, his role in maintaining faith, and his family's migration, we see a man who exemplified resilience, leadership, and trust in God. His life was not defined by the chaos of his time, but by his unwavering commitment to the worship of the one true God. Through his leadership, Eber ensured that his descendants would carry forward the legacy of faith, becoming a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of God's covenant. His story challenges us to remain faithful in our own journeys, trusting that God is working through every circumstance to accomplish his purposes. Eber's life as a patriarch and leader was marked by a deep sense of purpose and a steadfast commitment to preserving the worship of the one true God. In a time of great spiritual and cultural fragmentation, Eber stood as a pillar of faith, guiding his family and tribe with wisdom, humility, and unwavering devotion. His role as a patriarch extended beyond the immediate responsibilities of providing for and protecting his household. It encompassed the spiritual leadership required to sustain a lineage that would play a pivotal role in the unfolding of God's redemptive plan. Eber's leadership ensured that his descendants would remain faithful to their covenantal identity, setting the stage for the emergence of the Hebrew people as a distinct and chosen nation. Eber's position within his family and tribe was one of profound influence. As a direct descendant of Shem and the great-grandson of Noah, he inherited a legacy of faith and obedience that had been carefully passed down through the generations. This legacy was not merely a set of traditions, but a living covenant with the Creator, who had spared humanity through the flood, and called Shem's lineage to preserve his truth in a world increasingly dominated by idolatry. Eber embraced this calling with humility and determination, recognizing the weight of his responsibility as both a spiritual leader and a patriarch. His leadership was rooted in the principles of faith, obedience, and stewardship, qualities that defined his life and legacy. One of the most significant aspects of Eber's legacy was his role in shaping the identity of the Hebrew people. His name, which is associated with the term Hebrew, became a defining marker of this identity, symbolizing a people set apart for God's purposes. The Hebrew identity, characterized by a commitment to monotheism and a unique relationship with God, can be traced back to Eber's leadership and the values he instilled in his descendants. Through his guidance, Eber's family maintained their distinctiveness in the face of cultural and spiritual pressures, ensuring that the worship of the one true God remained central to their identity. This distinctiveness would later become a hallmark of the Hebrew people, who were called to be a light to the nations and a witness to God's faithfulness. Eber's influence extended beyond his immediate family to the broader community of his tribe. As a patriarch, he served as a mentor and teacher, imparting the truths of God's character and covenant to the next generation. His efforts to preserve the worship of God were intentional and far-reaching, involving both practical and spiritual dimensions. Eber ensured that his household was a place of prayer, worship, and instruction, where the stories of creation, the flood, and God's covenant with Noah were recounted and celebrated. This commitment to spiritual formation laid the groundwork for a lineage that would carry forward the knowledge of God and the hope of his promises. The significance of Eber's lineage is evident in the genealogies of Genesis, which highlight his connection to key figures in the biblical narrative. Through his son Peleg, Eber became an ancestor of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of Israel. This lineage underscores Eber's pivotal role in God's plan to establish a covenantal people, through whom he would reveal his character and purposes to the world. Eber's life and leadership were integral to this plan, as they provided the spiritual foundation upon which the Hebrew identity was built. His descendants, including the patriarchs, prophets, and ultimately the Messiah, carried forward the legacy of faith that Eber had nurtured and protected. Eber's efforts to preserve the worship of the one true God were particularly significant in the context of the cultural and spiritual challenges of his time. The post-Babel world was characterized by the proliferation of idolatry as nations and cultures developed their own pantheons of gods and religious practices. In this environment, Eber's commitment to monotheism set his family apart as a remnant of faithfulness in a sea of spiritual compromise. His leadership required not only personal devotion, but also the courage to resist the prevailing trends of his time. Eber understood that true worship was not about conforming to the practices of the world, but about aligning one's life with the will of the Creator. Eber's legacy as a preserver of faith is also reflected in the resilience of his descendants, who continued to uphold the worship of God amidst adversity and persecution. The Hebrew people who traced their identity back to Eber became a testament to the enduring power of faith to sustain a community through generations. This resilience was rooted in the principles that Eber had embodied and taught: a commitment to truth, a reliance on God's promises, and a willingness to stand firm in the face of opposition. Through his leadership, Eber ensured that the covenantal relationship with God was not only preserved but also deepened and strengthened, providing a foundation for the future of his lineage. The impact of Eber's leadership extends beyond his own time, as his life continues to inspire and challenge believers today. His example of faithfulness, humility, and perseverance reminds us of the importance of living with purpose and intentionality, recognizing that our actions and decisions have the potential to shape the future in profound ways. Eber's story invites us to reflect on our own roles as leaders and stewards of faith, encouraging us to invest in the spiritual growth of those around us and to remain steadfast in our commitment to God's purposes. Eber's leadership and legacy also highlight the interconnectedness of faith and identity. For Eber, preserving the worship of God was not only about maintaining religious practices, but also about cultivating a sense of belonging and purpose among his descendants. His life demonstrates that faith is not an individual journey, but a communal responsibility, one that requires dedication and collaboration to sustain. Eber's lineage serves as a reminder that our identity as followers of God is deeply tied to our commitment to His covenant and our willingness to live out His principles in every aspect of our lives. In reflecting on Eber's leadership and legacy, we see a man who embraced his calling with courage and conviction, leaving a lasting impact on his family, his tribe, and the broader narrative of salvation history. His life challenges us to consider how we can emulate his example in our own lives, leading with integrity, preserving the truths of faith, and passing on the knowledge of God to future generations. Through his unwavering commitment to the worship of the one true God, Eber ensured that his lineage would continue to bear witness to God's faithfulness and to carry forward the hope of His promises. Eber's legacy was most profoundly carried forward through his sons, Peleg and Joktan, whose lives and lineages played pivotal roles in biblical history. The birth of Peleg and Joktan marked a significant moment in Eber's life, one that symbolized the continuation of his spiritual mission and the expansion of his family's influence. Peleg's name, meaning division, serves as a historical and theological marker, referring to the division of the earth during his lifetime. This division, likely a result of the dispersion of nations following the events at the Tower of Babel, underscores the complexity and challenges of Eber's era. Despite the fragmentation of humanity, Eber's influence on his sons ensured that the worship of the one true God remained central to their identity and mission. Peleg's life was deeply intertwined with the cultural and spiritual transitions of his time. As the elder son, Peleg carried the weight of responsibility for continuing the covenantal legacy of his father. His name not only reflected the historical reality of the division of nations, but also symbolized the spiritual distinctiveness of his family amidst a world increasingly characterized by idolatry and rebellion. Eber's teachings and leadership shaped Peleg's understanding of God's character and covenant, preparing him to serve as a patriarch in his own right. Peleg's descendants would go on to form a critical link in the lineage leading to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, solidifying their role in the unfolding of God's redemptive plan. Joktan, Eber's younger son, also played a significant role in the expansion of his family's influence. Unlike Peleg, whose lineage led to the Hebrew people, Joktan's descendants became associated with various tribes and nations in the Arabian Peninsula. The genealogies in Genesis list Joktan's numerous sons, emphasizing the breadth of his impact and the diversity of his lineage. While Joktan's descendants were distinct from the covenantal line of Peleg, they still carried forward elements of Eber's legacy, particularly in their cultural and spiritual contributions to the ancient world. Eber's influence on Joktan ensured that his family's values and traditions were preserved, even as his descendants spread out across different regions. The division of nations during Peleg's time was a defining event in Eber's family history, one that highlighted both the challenges and opportunities of their era. The scattering of humanity into distinct languages and cultures created a context in which maintaining spiritual unity was increasingly difficult. For Eber, this division underscored the importance of his role as a patriarch and a spiritual leader. He recognized that the fragmentation of nations required intentional efforts to preserve the worship of God and to pass on the covenantal promises to future generations. Eber's guidance during this time ensured that his family remained rooted in their faith, even as they adapted to the changing dynamics of the post-Babel world. Eber's influence on his descendants extended far beyond the immediate context of his family. As a patriarch, he served as a mentor and teacher, imparting the truths of God's covenant and the principles of faith to his children and grandchildren. His efforts to preserve the worship of the one true God ensured that his lineage remained distinct, even as other nations turned to idolatry. Eber's life became a bridge between the generations, connecting the faith of his ancestors to the hopes of his descendants. Through his leadership, Eber's family became a beacon of faithfulness, standing as a testament to the enduring power of God's promises. The genealogies of Genesis highlight the significance of Eber's family in the broader narrative of salvation history. Through Peleg's line, Eber became an ancestor of Abraham, whose covenant with God would establish the Hebrew people as a nation set apart for his purposes. This lineage underscores Eber's pivotal role in the unfolding of God's plan, as his descendants carried forward the hope of redemption and the promise of blessing for all nations. Peleg's connection to Abraham illustrates the continuity of faith and the importance of generational stewardship in maintaining a covenantal relationship with God. Joktan's descendants, while distinct from the covenantal line of Peleg, also played an important role in the cultural and spiritual development of the ancient world. The tribes and nations that emerged from Joktan's lineage contributed to the diversity and richness of the post-Babel world, reflecting the breadth of Eber's influence as a patriarch. While Joktan's line did not directly lead to the Hebrew people, it nonetheless carried forward elements of Eber's legacy, particularly in their connection to the broader Semitic family. Eber's ability to guide and inspire both of his sons ensured that his family's impact would extend across different regions and contexts, shaping the course of history in profound ways. The dual legacy of Peleg and Joktan illustrates the depth and complexity of Eber's role as a patriarch. His influence was not limited to a single lineage or nation, but encompassed a wide range of cultural and spiritual contributions. Eber's ability to balance the distinct roles and responsibilities of his sons reflects his wisdom and leadership, as well as his commitment to preserving the unity and integrity of his family. This balance ensured that both Peleg and Joktan were equipped to fulfill their respective callings, carrying forward the values and traditions that Eber had instilled in them. Eber's family and descendants also serve as a reminder of the interconnectedness of faith and history. Through his lineage, Eber's life became a part of the larger narrative of God's plan for humanity, linking the covenantal promises of Noah and Shem to the redemptive work of Christ. His descendants, both within and beyond the covenantal line, contributed to the development of nations, cultures, and spiritual traditions that shaped the ancient world. Eber's leadership ensured that his family remained faithful to their calling, even as they navigated the challenges of a divided and fragmented world. In reflecting on Eber's family and descendants, we see the enduring impact of his faith and leadership. His commitment to preserving the worship of God and passing on the covenantal promises laid the foundation for the emergence of the Hebrew people and the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan. Eber's story challenges us to consider how our own lives can contribute to the legacy of faith, inspiring future generations to remain steadfast in their commitment to God's purposes. Through his sons Peleg and Joktan, Eber ensured that his family's influence would extend far beyond his own lifetime, shaping the course of history and testifying to the faithfulness of God. Eber lived during a time of significant cultural and spiritual transformation, a period when humanity was redefining its identity in the aftermath of the flood and the dispersion at Babel. As nations developed their own languages, customs, and religious practices, the world was marked by growing diversity and division. This environment presented unique challenges to maintaining the worship of the one true God, but Eber rose to the occasion with steadfast faith and unwavering commitment. His role as a patriarch extended beyond his household, as he became a spiritual anchor for his family amidst the shifting tides of culture and belief. Eber's faith was not passive. It was a living, active force that guided his family through the complexities of their time and provided a model of devotion and integrity for generations to come. Eber's leadership during these changing times was characterized by his ability to adapt without compromising the core principles of his faith. The division of nations following Babel created an environment in which the worship of God became increasingly countercultural. Idolatry and the worship of man-made deities were on the rise, as scattered communities sought to establish their identities apart from God. Eber recognized the dangers of these trends and took deliberate steps to ensure that his family remained rooted in the covenantal promises of God. His leadership involved both spiritual teaching and practical guidance, as he instilled in his children and grandchildren the importance of staying faithful to God's commands while navigating the challenges of a divided and often hostile world. One of Eber's greatest contributions as a patriarch was his ability to impart spiritual lessons that transcended the immediate context of his time. He understood that the challenges his family faced were not merely external, but also internal, requiring a deep and personal commitment to God's truth. To address this, Eber emphasized the importance of cultivating a relationship with God that was both communal and individual. He taught his descendants that true worship was not about rituals or appearances, but about aligning one's heart and actions with the will of the Creator. Through stories of God's faithfulness to Noah and Shem, Eber demonstrated that the same God who had preserved their family through the flood would continue to guide and sustain them, even in the face of uncertainty and opposition. Eber's teachings also reflected his deep understanding of the covenantal promises that had been passed down through his lineage. He reminded his family that they were part of a larger narrative, one that began with creation and continued through the covenant with Noah. This sense of continuity gave his descendants a sense of purpose and identity, helping them to see their lives as part of God's unfolding plan. Eber's ability to connect the past with the present and future allowed his family to navigate the complexities of their time with confidence and faith. His lessons were not only about survival, but about thriving as a people set apart for God's purposes. In guiding his family through cultural and spiritual challenges, Eber demonstrated the importance of discernment and wisdom. He recognized that not all cultural changes were inherently bad, but that they needed to be evaluated through the lens of God's truth. Eber taught his family to engage with the world around them without being conformed to its values. This approach required a balance of openness and conviction, as Eber encouraged his descendants to remain rooted in their faith while also being a light to the nations. His leadership ensured that his family maintained their distinct identity as followers of God, even as they interacted with and influenced the cultures around them. Eber's role as a spiritual leader extended to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as he sought to pass on the principles of faith to future generations. He understood that the preservation of their spiritual heritage depended on intentional teaching and mentorship. Eber took the time to invest in the spiritual growth of his family, sharing the stories, values, and lessons that had shaped his own faith journey. He emphasized the importance of prayer, worship, and obedience as foundational practices for maintaining a relationship with God. Through his example, Eber showed his descendants that faith was not just a set of beliefs but a way of life, one that required dedication, discipline, and trust in God's promises. The spiritual lessons Eber imparted were practical as well as theological. He taught his family how to navigate the challenges of daily life while remaining faithful to their covenantal identity. Eber's guidance included advice on how to resist the temptations of idolatry, how to foster unity within the family, and how to approach work and relationships in a way that honored God. His teachings were grounded in the principles of humility, gratitude, and stewardship, reminding his descendants that everything they had, whether material or spiritual, was a gift from God. Eber's ability to translate these principles into actionable lessons ensured that his teachings remained relevant and impactful for generations to come. Eber's faith amidst changing times was also evident in his willingness to trust God's guidance, even when the path forward was unclear. The division of nations and the spread of idolatry could have led to despair, but Eber chose to focus on God's faithfulness rather than the uncertainties of the world. This trust allowed him to lead his family with confidence and hope, encouraging them to rely on God's promises rather than their own understanding. Eber's unwavering faith became a source of strength and inspiration for his descendants, reminding them that God's plans were greater than any human circumstance. The impact of Eber's faith and leadership is evident in the resilience of his descendants, who continued to uphold the worship of God even in the face of adversity. The Hebrew identity, which traces its roots back to Eber, reflects the values and principles that he embodied and passed down. His life serves as a testament to the power of faith to sustain and guide a community through periods of change and uncertainty. Eber's legacy challenges us to consider how we can remain faithful in our own times of transition, trusting in God's promises and investing in the spiritual growth of those around us. In reflecting on Eber's faith amidst changing times, we see a man who embraced his role as a patriarch and spiritual leader with humility and determination. His life was marked by a deep trust in God's faithfulness and a commitment to preserving the truths of faith for future generations. Through his teachings, mentorship, and example, Eber ensured that his family remained rooted in their covenantal identity, even as the world around them changed. His story challenges us to consider how we can live with similar faith and intentionality, recognizing that our actions and decisions have the power to shape the spiritual trajectory of those who come after us. As Eber advanced in years, his life became a living testament to the promises of God and the enduring power of faith. The wisdom he had accumulated over decades of leadership and spiritual stewardship allowed him to look back with gratitude and forward with hope. Eber's later years were marked by a quiet yet profound sense of reflection, as he considered the legacy he had built and the promises of God that had guided his journey. He saw the hand of God at work in the lives of his descendants, from Peleg and Joktan to the broader community that had grown under his guidance. Each generation carried a piece of the covenantal promise, and Eber understood that his role was part of a much larger narrative, one that would continue long after his time on earth. Eber's reflections often turned to the promises made to his great-grandfather Noah and the blessings passed down through Shem's line. The covenant with Noah had assured humanity of God's mercy and faithfulness, a promise symbolized by the rainbow and reaffirmed through every generation. As a descendant of Shem, Eber had carried the mantle of this covenant with dedication and humility, ensuring that the worship of the one true God remained central to his family's identity. In his later years, Eber found comfort and strength in these promises, knowing that God's plans were unshakable, even amidst the uncertainties of life. This confidence in God's faithfulness allowed Eber to lead with conviction, inspiring his family to remain steadfast in their faith. Eber's reflections also extended to the legacy he hoped to leave behind. He recognized that his life was not an endpoint, but a link in the unbroken chain of God's covenantal plan. For Eber, legacy was not measured in material wealth or territorial expansion, but in the spiritual heritage he had nurtured within his family. He hoped that his descendants would continue to uphold the worship of God, passing down the stories, principles, and values that had defined their identity. Eber's later years were spent investing in the spiritual growth of his family, ensuring that the truths of God's character and promises were deeply rooted in their hearts. He understood that the true measure of his life's work would be seen in the faithfulness of future generations. Despite the physical challenges that came with aging, Eber remained active in his role as a patriarch and spiritual leader. His wisdom and experience made him a revered figure within his family and community, and his counsel was sought in matters both practical and spiritual. Eber's continued leadership was characterized by humility and a servant's heart, as he prioritized the well-being of his family and the preservation of their faith. His later years were a testament to the idea that leadership is not about exerting control, but about guiding and empowering others to fulfill their potential. Eber's faithfulness in this role ensured that his influence extended far beyond his own lifetime. Eber's reflections were often shared with his children and grandchildren, as he recounted the stories of God's faithfulness and the lessons he had learned throughout his life. These moments of storytelling were not merely about preserving history. They were opportunities to inspire and equip the next generation to carry forward the covenantal promise. Eber's stories included accounts of the flood, the covenant with Noah, the dispersion at Babel, and the significance of their family's role in maintaining the worship of God. These stories became touchstones for his descendants, grounding them in their identity and mission as a chosen people. As he aged, Eber's faith remained as vibrant and steadfast as ever. He continued to lead by example, demonstrating the importance of prayer, worship, and obedience in everyday life. Eber's relationship with God deepened in his later years, as he spent more time in reflection and communion with the Creator. This intimacy with God gave Eber a sense of peace and purpose, even as he prepared for the eventual transition from this life to the next. He saw his aging not as a diminishing of his role, but as an opportunity to mentor and inspire others, ensuring that his family was equipped to carry forward the faith after his passing. Eber's reflections also included moments of gratitude for the blessings he had witnessed during his lifetime. He marveled at the growth of his family and the ways in which God had provided for their needs and protected them through challenges. Eber's gratitude was not limited to tangible blessings. He also gave thanks for the spiritual growth he saw in his descendants and the ways in which they embraced their covenantal identity. This gratitude became a central theme in Eber's later years, shaping his interactions with others and deepening his relationship with God. In considering the legacy he hoped to leave behind, Eber often prayed for his descendants, asking God to guide and protect them as they navigated the challenges of life. His prayers reflected his deep love for his family and his unwavering trust in God's faithfulness. Eber's intercessions were filled with hope and expectation, as he believed that the promises of God would continue to unfold through his lineage. These prayers became a source of strength and encouragement for his family, reminding them of their connection to both Eber's faith and God's greater plan. Eber's later years also served as a reminder to his descendants that faith is a lifelong journey, one that requires perseverance and dedication. His continued leadership and devotion demonstrated that the pursuit of God's purposes does not end with age, but evolves as life progresses. Eber's life challenged his family to remain faithful in their own journeys, trusting that God's promises were true and that their faithfulness would have an impact on future generations. In reflecting on Eber's later years and his legacy, we see a man who embraced his role as a patriarch and spiritual leader with grace and determination. His life was marked by a deep trust in God's promises, a commitment to preserving the worship of the one true God, and a desire to inspire future generations to live with purpose and faith. Eber's story reminds us that our lives are part of a larger narrative, one that extends beyond our own time and into the unfolding of God's eternal plan. Through his reflections, leadership, and unwavering faith, Eber left a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge believers to this day. Eber's death marked the end of an extraordinary life, one that had spanned generations and left an indelible mark on his family and the broader narrative of biblical history. Though the scriptures do not provide detailed circumstances surrounding his death, the spiritual significance of his life is unmistakable. Eber passed away as a man of faith, surrounded by a family that had been deeply shaped by his leadership and devotion to God. His death was not merely the conclusion of his earthly journey, but the transition of a legacy that would carry on through his descendants. For his family, the loss of Eber was profound, as they mourned the passing of a patriarch who had been a guiding light through times of challenge and transformation. Eber's passing would have been a moment of reflection for his descendants, who had witnessed his unwavering faith and tireless efforts to preserve the worship of the one true God. His life had been a testament to the power of faith and the enduring nature of God's promises. Eber's family understood that his death was not the end of his influence, but the continuation of a legacy that would stretch far beyond his lifetime. Through his sons, Peleg and Joktan, and their respective lineages, Eber's impact would ripple through history, shaping nations and cultures in ways that reflected his spiritual leadership and dedication to God's covenant. The spiritual significance of Eber's life lies in his role as a preserver and transmitter of faith. As a patriarch, Eber had embraced the responsibility of carrying forward the covenantal promises given to his great-grandfather Noah and reaffirmed through Shem. His life was a bridge between the foundational events of the flood and the emergence of nations after Babel. Eber's ability to maintain faithfulness in a time of spiritual and cultural fragmentation ensured that the worship of God remained central to his family's identity. His death served as a reminder to his descendants of the importance of continuing this mission, carrying forward the truths that had been entrusted to them. Eber's legacy as a father of nations is one of the most enduring aspects of his life. Through Peleg, Eber became the ancestor of the Hebrew people, a lineage that would ultimately lead to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel. This lineage, rooted in Eber's faithfulness, became the vessel for God's redemptive plan, culminating in the coming of the Messiah. The connection between Eber and the Hebrew identity is highlighted by the term Hebrew itself, which is derived from his name. This designation not only honors Eber's life, but also underscores his pivotal role in shaping a people set apart for God's purposes. As the namesake of the Hebrews, Eber's legacy is a testament to the enduring impact of a life lived in alignment with God's will. Joktan's descendants, while distinct from the covenantal line of Peleg, also carried forward aspects of Eber's legacy. The tribes and nations that emerged from Joktan's lineage reflect the diversity and breadth of Eber's influence as a patriarch. Though their paths diverged from the covenantal line, Joktan's descendants contributed to the cultural and spiritual development of the ancient world, bearing traces of the values and principles that Eber had instilled. This dual legacy, through Peleg's covenantal line and Joktan's expansive lineage, demonstrates the multifaceted nature of Eber's impact as a father of nations. Eber's death also invites reflection on the qualities that defined his life and leadership. His unwavering faith, humility, and dedication to God's promises set a standard for his descendants to follow. Eber's ability to navigate the challenges of his time, from the dispersion at Babel to the cultural shifts of the post-flood world, speaks to his resilience and wisdom. His life exemplifies the principles of generational faithfulness, where the actions and decisions of one generation have a profound impact on those that follow. Eber's legacy challenges us to consider how our own lives can contribute to the spiritual growth and continuity of future generations. For the Hebrews, Eber's life and name became a symbol of identity and purpose. As the ancestors of a people chosen by God to bear his covenant, Eber's descendants carried forward his mission of preserving the worship of God and living as a light to the nations. This identity was not merely about lineage, but about a calling, a responsibility to reflect God's character and uphold his truths in a world often opposed to his ways. Eber's life laid the foundation for this identity, providing a model of faithfulness and integrity that would guide his descendants through centuries of trials and triumphs. Eber's death also served as a moment of unity for his family and tribe, as they came together to honor his life and reflect on the legacy he left behind. His passing was not marked by despair, but by a sense of gratitude for the ways in which God had used Eber to shape their lives and their collective mission. The stories of Eber's faith, wisdom, and leadership were recounted and celebrated, ensuring that his influence would continue to inspire and guide future generations. For his descendants, Eber's life became a touchstone, a reminder of their connection to God's covenant and their role in his plan for humanity. In reflecting on Eber's legacy, we are reminded of the power of faith to transcend time and circumstance. Eber's life was not defined by the challenges of his era, but by his steadfast commitment to God's promises and his dedication to preserving the truths of faith. His influence extended far beyond his own lifetime, shaping the course of history and laying the groundwork for the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan. Eber's story challenges us to consider how we can live with similar intentionality, recognizing that our actions and decisions have the potential to impact generations to come. Eber's death was a culmination of a life well lived, a life that had been wholly dedicated to God and his purposes. Through his faithfulness, Eber ensured that his descendants would continue to carry forward the worship of God and the hope of his promises. His legacy as a father of nations and the namesake of the Hebrews is a testament to the enduring impact of a life lived in alignment with God's will. As we reflect on Eber's story, we are reminded that true legacy is not about material wealth or earthly achievements, but about the spiritual inheritance we pass on to future generations. Eber's life inspires us to live with purpose, faith, and a commitment to the greater narrative of God's plan for humanity. Eber's life is a wellspring of lessons on faith, endurance, and the stewardship of spiritual heritage, offering wisdom that remains profoundly relevant to modern challenges. His journey was defined by a steadfast commitment to God, even in the face of cultural and spiritual upheaval. As a patriarch who lived during a time of great change, Eber demonstrated that faith is not simply a belief system, but a way of life, a daily choice to trust in God's promises and to align one's actions with his will. This faith was the foundation of Eber's legacy, shaping his family's identity and ensuring that the knowledge of God was preserved for future generations. One of the most striking lessons from Eber's life is the importance of enduring faith. Eber lived in a world marked by the fragmentation of Babel and the rise of idolatry, yet he remained unwavering in his commitment to the worship of the one true God. This endurance was not born out of blind optimism, but out of a deep trust in God's character and his covenantal promises. Eber's ability to hold fast to his faith amidst the shifting tides of culture reminds us that endurance is essential in navigating life's uncertainties. His life challenges us to cultivate a faith that is resilient, one that can withstand the pressures and distractions of a world often at odds with God's truth. Stewardship is another key theme in Eber's life, particularly in the way he approached his role as a patriarch and spiritual leader. Eber understood that his faith was not solely for his own benefit, but was a gift entrusted to him for the sake of others. He took seriously his responsibility to pass on the knowledge of God to his descendants, ensuring that they were equipped to carry forward the covenantal mission. This stewardship extended beyond teaching religious practices. It involved modeling a life of integrity, humility, and obedience. Eber's example reminds us that stewardship is about more than preserving what we have. It is about investing in the spiritual growth and well-being of those around us. Eber's life also teaches us about the importance of maintaining identity in the face of cultural pressures. The dispersion of nations following Babel created an environment in which the worship of God became increasingly countercultural. Eber's family was surrounded by societies that sought to define themselves through their own gods, rituals, and practices. Yet he remained committed to preserving the distinct identity of his lineage as followers of the one true God. This commitment required discernment, courage, and a willingness to stand apart from the prevailing trends of the time. Eber's life reminds us that maintaining spiritual integrity often requires us to swim against the current, holding fast to our values even when they are unpopular or misunderstood. The parallels between Eber's challenges and modern struggles in maintaining faith and identity are striking. Just as Eber faced the pressures of idolatry and cultural conformity, today's believers encounter a world filled with competing ideologies, distractions, and temptations. The rise of secularism, materialism, and relativism can make it difficult to remain grounded in faith. Yet Eber's example shows us that it is possible to stay true to God's calling, even in the midst of a shifting cultural landscape. His life challenges us to evaluate the influences around us and to prioritize our relationship with God above all else. By doing so, we can cultivate an identity that is rooted in faith and resilience, much like Eber's. Another lesson from Eber's life is the value of generational faithfulness. Eber understood that his actions and decisions would have a profound impact on the spiritual trajectory of his descendants. His commitment to teaching, mentoring, and leading by example ensured that the truths of God's covenant were not only preserved but also passed down with clarity and purpose. This generational perspective is especially relevant today, as families and communities navigate the complexities of raising children in a world that often undermines traditional values. Eber's life reminds us that the choices we make today can shape the spiritual legacy of future generations, encouraging us to invest in relationships and to prioritize the transmission of faith. Eber's endurance and stewardship also highlight the power of hope in navigating life's challenges. Throughout his life, Eber held on to the promises of God, trusting that his plan was unfolding even when the world seemed chaotic and uncertain. This hope allowed Eber to lead with confidence and to inspire his family to do the same. In a modern context where uncertainty and instability often dominate the cultural narrative, Eber's hope serves as a beacon, reminding us that God's promises remain true and that our faith is never in vain. His life encourages us to find strength in the assurance of God's faithfulness and to lead others with a sense of purpose and hope. The stewardship of spiritual heritage is perhaps Eber's most enduring lesson. His dedication to preserving and passing on the knowledge of God ensured that his family remained connected to the covenantal promises given to Noah and Shem. This heritage became the foundation for the Hebrew identity, shaping the trajectory of a people called to be a light to the nations. Eber's life challenges us to consider how we can steward our own spiritual heritage, ensuring that the truths of faith are not only preserved but also shared with others. Whether through teaching, mentorship, or example, we have the opportunity to pass on the principles of faith and to inspire others to live in alignment with God's purposes. Eber's life also offers a powerful reminder of the interconnectedness of faith and community. His leadership was not about individual achievement, but about fostering a sense of unity and shared purpose within his family and tribe. Eber understood that faith thrives in the context of relationships, where people can encourage, support, and challenge one another to grow. This emphasis on community is especially relevant in today's world, where isolation and individualism often hinder spiritual growth. Eber's example challenges us to invest in our communities and to create spaces where faith can flourish and be passed on to future generations. In reflecting on Eber's life, we see a man who embraced his role as a patriarch and spiritual leader with grace, wisdom, and determination. His faith, endurance, and stewardship of spiritual heritage serve as a model for believers navigating the complexities of modern life. Eber's story challenges us to live with intentionality, recognizing that our choices have the power to shape not only our own lives, but also the lives of those who come after us. His legacy reminds us that faith is not a solitary journey, but a shared responsibility, one that requires dedication, courage, and a deep trust in God's promises. As we draw lessons from Eber's life, we are reminded of the enduring relevance of his story and the ways in which it speaks to our own challenges and opportunities. His unwavering faith, commitment to stewardship, and resilience in the face of cultural pressures inspire us to live with purpose and integrity, trusting that God is working through us to accomplish His greater plan. Through Eber's example, we are encouraged to persevere in our faith, to invest in the spiritual growth of others, and to leave a legacy that honors God and reflects His love to the world. As we bring this journey through the life of Eber to a close, we are reminded of the extraordinary legacy he left behind, a legacy of faith, endurance, and the stewardship of spiritual heritage. Eber's life, though often overshadowed in the genealogies, is a cornerstone of the biblical narrative. Born into the lineage of Shem, Eber lived during an era of great upheaval, marked by the aftermath of the flood, the rebellion at Babel, and the fragmentation of humanity into nations and languages. Yet, amidst these challenges, Eber stood as a figure of resilience and devotion, dedicating his life to preserving the worship of the one true God and passing down the covenantal promises to future generations. Eber's role in the biblical narrative is deeply significant. Through his son Peleg, he became the ancestor of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel, forming the covenantal line that would eventually bring forth the Messiah. The very term Hebrew, derived from Eber's name, symbolizes the identity of a people chosen by God to carry His promises and reflect His character to the nations. Eber's faithfulness ensured that this identity was rooted in a relationship with the Creator, grounded in principles of humility, obedience, and trust. His legacy is a testament to the power of one life to shape the course of history and to serve as a conduit for God's redemptive plan. Reflecting on Eber's life, we see a man who embraced his role as a patriarch and spiritual leader with grace and determination. He navigated the complexities of his time, cultural shifts, spiritual fragmentation, and the dispersion of nations, while remaining steadfast in his commitment to God. Eber's story challenges us to consider how we can embody similar faithfulness in our own lives. Like Eber, we are called to preserve the truths of faith, to lead with integrity, and to pass on the knowledge of God to those who come after us. His life reminds us that faith is not only about personal devotion, but also about communal responsibility, a responsibility to invest in the spiritual growth of others and to steward the gifts and promises God has entrusted to us. One of the most powerful aspects of Eber's story is his unwavering hope in the promises of God. Even as the world around him grew increasingly fragmented and idolatrous, Eber held fast to the covenant given to his great-grandfather Noah and passed down through Shem. This hope gave Eber the strength to lead with confidence and to inspire his family to remain faithful. In a modern context, where uncertainty and instability often dominate the narrative, Eber's life serves as a beacon of encouragement. His trust in God's faithfulness reminds us that we too can find strength and purpose in the promises of Scripture, knowing that God's plan is unfolding even when we cannot see the full picture. Eber's life also highlights the importance of legacy, what we leave behind for future generations. For Eber, legacy was not measured in material wealth or power, but in the spiritual heritage he nurtured within his family. His commitment to teaching, mentoring, and leading by example ensured that his descendants carried forward the worship of God and the principles of faith. This legacy became the foundation for the Hebrew identity and the covenantal mission that would culminate in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Eber's story challenges us to reflect on the legacy we are building in our own lives. Are we investing in the spiritual growth of those around us? Are we living in a way that points others to God and inspires them to walk in His truth? As we consider Eber's story, we are encouraged to explore other biblical narratives for inspiration and guidance. The lives of the patriarchs, prophets, and faithful servants of God are rich with lessons that remain relevant today. Each story, like Eber's, is a reminder that God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary purposes. By delving into these narratives, we can gain a deeper understanding of God's character and His plan for humanity, while also finding practical wisdom for navigating the challenges of modern life. Eber's life is a starting point, a gateway to discovering the depth and beauty of Scripture and the timeless truths it holds. Before we conclude, I would like to take a moment to pray with you, drawing from the lessons we've learned through Eber's life. Wherever you are, I invite you to join me in prayer and repeat after me. Heavenly Father, thank you for the example of Eber, a man of faith and endurance who lived to honor you. Help me to learn from his life, to trust in your promises, and to remain steadfast in my commitment to you. Teach me to invest in the spiritual growth of others, to preserve the truths of faith, and to leave a legacy that reflects your love and grace. Lord, strengthen me to navigate the challenges of this world with courage and hope. Knowing that your plan is greater than any circumstance, guide my steps and use my life for your glory. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. If Eber's story has inspired or encouraged you today, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on how his life can shape your own. Consider the ways in which you can cultivate faith, endurance, and stewardship in your daily walk with God. Whether it's through prayer, study, or acts of service, there are countless ways to live out the lessons we've learned from Eber's journey. Finally, I encourage you to support this channel so that we can continue to share biblical stories and their relevance for our lives today. If you found this video meaningful, please like it, leave a comment below with your thoughts or questions, and share it with others who might benefit from these teachings. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so that you never miss an update. Your engagement helps us bring these messages to more people, spreading the truth and hope of God's Word to a wider audience. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life of Eber. It has been a privilege to share his story with you and to reflect on the incredible legacy he left behind. As we go forward, may we carry with us the lessons of Eber's life and live in a way that honors God and inspires others. Remember, your story, like Eber's, is part of God's greater plan. You are called to live with purpose, to trust in His promises, and to be a light in the world. Until next time, may God bless you and guide you in all that you do.